of not just today, but the full conference really. And what Ludovine and myself, with the help of Rose, of course, are going to try and do is try to summarize some of what we have heard over the course of the last week, and then begin to sort of, taking Julie's advice here, say, okay, well, so what? What do we actually do with it? Is this just yet another 8 sessions worth of us all going, oh yeah, well, that was very interesting, and then this afternoon we can go and get on with our lives? Or is this something that can act as one of those pebbles cast into that pond, so we can actually instigate some of that change? And of course, in the past, we have managed to instigate various aspects of change, but what do we think this week is really all about? So Ludovine, I shall start sharing the slides my end, but I'm going to pass across to yourself pretty damn quickly, to be honest, to say, okay, because these slides have been put together over the course of the last few hours whilst everybody has been speaking. You should see the number of versions that have gone backwards and forwards, where we've gone, oh, we need to add that in, oh, we need to add this in. It's been quite spectacular. So Ludovine, if you want to come to the stage, and I shall start sharing the slides, and we will go into that final wrap up with regards to what we think we have heard this week. When we get to the end of this, all of our lovely speakers from this morning, if you are happy to stick around, we would love to get your critique on what we're saying. Did we get it right? Did we miss something? Do you think that any of what we're saying will actually make a difference? Or is it just another arm wavy nothingness that isn't really going to help anyone at all? And be harsh with us, because we need this critical feedback. So going to the slides, Ludovine, over to your lovely self.
Thank you very much, Sarah. For those of you who actually went full circle with us, you will recognize my very colorful slides from the very beginning, because we did start by mapping where we've been these last 2 years. This is the 3rd iteration of the conference. In the meantime, there's been actions, but we are also right now in the process of really structuring the next steps for this movement to turn into an initiative, and hopefully a real change agent on a wide, significant scale. Could you skip ahead, please, Sarah? Thanks. This very busy slide is really a view of where we started. Okay, we started with this recognition of the stakes, a clear call to action, and the fact that mining is intrinsic to all of these aspects. I want to avoid using the word role, because what's really come across throughout this week is that this role is evolving. It's also multidimensional. And frankly, it seems to be at the moment really taking on different shapes and different colors for every stakeholder looking into it. And I think rather than, bemoaning that confusion, we should celebrate it, because out of this enormous complexity arises a lot of opportunity. And at some point, solutions really emerge from chaos. So this is really the view that we started with. And skip ahead, please, to the next slide, Sarah. This is kind of where we positioned our mandate before all of these discussions. As I said earlier, the scope of responsible raw materials is very much hinging on that interlinkage between criticality and responsibility. Criticality is not an option to do what we want. Responsibility has to factor in the need to respond to the criticality stakes. So they have to be balanced, and better yet, they can improve each other along the way. And what I think you'll see in the next few slides is where we positioned our strength, which is the colossal diversity of the network and of the connections that have been created around responsible minerals, materials, throughout these conferences. And the 3 pillars of action that we think are most relevant to this emerging organization. The first one is dialogue. The second one is sharing the knowledge and sharing the inputs that emerge from this dialogue. And the next step, very much in our view, is devising an advocacy platform that is informed by our deep sector knowledge, but also very independent, because we represent every company, every stakeholder, every input, every discipline. In a way, it gives us a colossal margin of freedom. I think perhaps, Sarah, if you want to recap on where the week has taken us, one thing that I would say that is absolutely clear is that the common foundation of every single discussion we've had has been those three parameters at the bottom: the recognition of a climate emergency, the pervasive value of the sustainability imperative, and the ESG expectations in the recognition that ESG is fundamentally a tool to achieve these objectives. So I think that has come across every single one of our discussions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Ludovine. So moving into, okay, so what have we been hearing over the course of the week? And Ludovine, jump in here. These are some of the resounding words that we've had coming through. So earlier on in the week, we ran some word clouds, we ran all kinds of collaborative tools, which were brilliant. In terms of what does this look like, you can see everything would just get on with it. we know what we need to do. We know that we're going to make mistakes, but we need to instigate this action. What about the business model? And there's been a resounding theme of that coming through today. So how do we actually do this thing called mining? And to be honest, what on earth do we mean by mining in the first place? Most people don't understand what it even is. To ensure that this actually happens, things like we need that systems change, we need the change in the mechanics, etc. We also need to understand who are all of the different people involved with this, and what truly is that shared value. What does value mean to those different individuals? What do they actually want to get out of this? And speaking to Julie's final words there, how do you make sure that this really is a force for good rather than somebody being even perceived to be taking advantage of somebody else? So how do we deal with that? Bearing in mind that this is an incredibly complex situation and it involves en masse economic systems, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we make this happen? It is so easy. It would be so easy for us to go, oh, it's all just too difficult. I'm going to go back to my life now and actually deal with what I can control, rather than saying, well, which bits of this particular beast do I start nibbling away at? And not just looking at the threats that we can stop happening or that we can try and correct, but actually looking for the upside as well. All too often, I think, to organizations, especially when they're doing audits, for example, people are looking at that environment, social governance, and they're looking at the threats that hang off them and say, okay, have we managed to control all of those threats? Instead of also looking at the upside to say, hey, you know what? If we did this properly, there's huge opportunity out there to actually build something that is so much more exciting and better for everybody involved. So actually, rather than just saying, here's my level of compliance, let's just try and maintain that, then big tick in the box, actually taking a step back and going, well, let's reimagine that. What does this look like? So with regards to all of this, we've seen huge amounts of connection between everybody over the last week. Okay, so we've had 64 talks and panel sessions. We've heard from 79 speakers. With regards to the diversity of those speakers, we've had people speak to us, and I will miss some of the countries out here, so my sincere apologies. We've had people speak to us from the Philippines, Australia, different parts of Asia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, South Africa, all over Europe, which includes Ukraine as well. Obviously the UK, Ireland, across into Canada, the USA, and different parts of Latin America, including a number of very senior influential individuals from Peru yesterday. So this is something where we have intentionally tried to hear from as many different geographies around the world. Amongst our speakers, we are more or less evenly split with regards to those who identify predominantly more on the female versus male side of things. So of course, from a gender perspective, we've attempted to bring in diversity there. And then, as previously mentioned, we've also heard from people who really like mining. We've heard from people who really don't like mining. We've heard from people who use the products that are produced by the mining sector. We've heard from people who write the regulations that perhaps change how we do some of the things. We've heard from people who fund different activities within the sector, and a whole host of other individuals as well. It's been a really lovely journey, I think, with regards to hearing all of these different perspectives, and also in each session as well, welcoming those perspectives into the room and say, I respect you for what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I want to learn because I'm happy for my perspective to change, because I want to make sure that this is settled in my own mind. So in terms of those creation of connections, that's really begun to happen. And I'm sure the same is for Ludovine and for Rose, but my inbox has just been exploding with people saying, oh, you really need to introduce this person with that person. And if we do nothing else at the course of this conference, then that is truly brilliant. So actually making those connections and actually opening up those doors that otherwise people might not think were even open to them. And one of those areas, of course, is around deep sea mining. That's been one of the recurring themes that we've been talking about during this conference all the way through. And that's a case there where really linking some of those different stakeholders together who never thought that they could talk to one another. They perhaps knew about one another, but they never thought it was appropriate for them to open that conversation. So that has been truly empowering, certainly for myself anyway, with regards to that. Other things as well, of course, that are immediately coming out of this, as mentioned yesterday afternoon, launched during this week, there is an EduMine course focusing in on ESG within the mining sector. If you want to have those links, go for it. And that has been contributed to by previous Responsible Raw Materials conferences. Starting off in 2 weeks' time, Rose, I think there is a 10-part seminar series that's being run by the Geological Society, which will feature a number of the speakers that you've already met during the course of this week. So Pauline, you were saying yesterday you don't know what you're going to do next week because there's not going to be some free YouTube TV with all of us featuring. Well, don't worry, you just need to hang on for 2 weeks and then we're back, because every week we will be featuring on a Wednesday or a Thursday with sessions here, really looking at not just the geosciences role within mining, but the broader perspective. Also from a Responsible Raw Materials perspective, we'll be there at PDAC, so the big Canadian conference starting in June. And then, as mentioned yesterday, we will also be at Glastonbury, which is pretty damn cool, to be honest. So we'll be there sharing the stand with the Geological Society at Glastonbury within the science area, saying, okay, where do we get our raw materials from? What do we need to be changing to make sure that we do this in a truly responsible manner? And how does this impact on the world? So as you can see here, a diverse area of different aspects that we'll be going into. So those are some of the things that have been happening, but let's just really delve into what Ludovine was saying now about some of the themes that have come out from this week. So here is the agenda, okay, that we have been looking at. So yes, so these are the 79 speakers that we've had over the course of this week. And as you can see here, so 8 sessions, so we're missing the number 8 because we didn't want to cover up your names over here in the final one. Ludovine's going, oh, we missed it. But in terms of what are some of those themes that came out from each of those sessions? And Ludovine, I don't know if you want to hop in here or do you want me to go for it?
Sure. To some extent, it's incredibly interesting how the the juxtaposition of different speakers from different backgrounds and actually looking sometimes at very different aspects of mining and the just transition and that equation actually seem to systematically come to coalesce around a shared problem, sometimes a shared solution. And I think that also is an indicator of how very much we need these roundtable formats, how we need to pull ourselves out of our silos, however reassuring they may be, to actually confront ourselves to this complexity. So just very quickly to go through, I mean, the first session very much focused on discovering the just transition concept and more importantly, how it reflects into each one of our disciplines and practice areas. The reason I sort of boldly entitled the second session Setting Expectations is because all of these speakers in some way, shape or form reminded us that mining does not happen in a vacuum. We are accountable to ourselves as professionals, to business owners, i.e. shareholders, but also to a series of other stakeholders. So again, really pulling out that sort of external view and making a point of those vital connections. The third session was very much focusing on trust, but also what comes before trust, which is making ourselves vulnerable enough in our convictions, in the emotions that they can trigger, and in what we hope to contribute to the solutions development. And it was a very striking session for me. I'm a lawyer by background. The reason people study law is generally because they want to understand the system. And seeing so many speakers say, we can put the system on the table, break it open and start again, if we do it from a position of trust, is something that's incredibly empowering for many of the people who feel threatened by this change. So I thought that was a very important aspect. Sarah, I don't know if you want to look at some of the other ones, because we're veering more into your territory there.
Sure. So session 3 being vulnerable and actually saying, okay, how do we build that trust? Then into session 4, and I think the reason why Ludovine's handed over to me here is we started off with the rocks, and of course I'm originally, full disclosure in case you haven't worked this out already, I'm originally a geologist, and yeah, why do we go into geology? Again, I could be very I could take the mickey out of myself greatly, but I think that the reason why people go and study geology is because they want to understand the earth as a system. That's why people go into geology. And when we're studying the rocks, we're not just focused on the rocks, we're also looking at the interaction between people and the earth as well. So what we had here was really seeing mining, perhaps what is the role of mining within this system? And actually, and we'll show you some diagrams on this in a second, but viewing mining and processing as perhaps one of the keystone within the circular economy. And I'm being really grand about this as well. And we'll explain this, why I can see Emma going, what does she mean by keystone? We'll explain this to you in a second. On into session 5, and this was then really saying, okay, well, what does the system actually look like, and what are the mechanics of that system, and how can we perhaps change some of this as well, and with regards to that, so this is where we had our dinosaurs to the donut economics, for example. So dinosaurs meaning actually children in schools or whatever, they love playing with those dinosaurs, but at some point in time, everyone then decides that mining is horrible. So actually what's going on there, coupled with the fact that we need to be thinking about the full-blown economic system and Ludovine's revolution. So the fact that she's in France right now, perhaps filtering into her general psyche. On into session 6, which is actually where we started off, the morning session perhaps, which was around information. So what information do we need to be collecting in from people? How do we have respect for that information? How do we view that information? How do we collect it together? Into session 7, which is where we hit the shared value. So what does that truly mean? So as Julie was saying, what does everybody actually want to get from all of this? And they're going to be different things. So how do we view that, and how do we respect that as well? So what does that look like? And then finally into today's session, so session 8, and you can see what Ludovine's done here is she's gone, woohoo, we've got the same themes coming through again. So I think that the theme for session 8, as has been noted here, is collaboration. So actually, how do we come together? How do we share these ideas? And that collaboration is, of course, shown where we've done some fudged mapping back to the themes of the other sessions. So Antoine and Liesl, talking about perhaps information, for example, plus a whole host of the other areas. Johannes then really talking about, okay, yeah, what do we mean by the just transition, and what does that mean perhaps in the European context? Across into Phil, so saying, okay, yeah, what does this system look like? Where do the byproducts, etc., come in? And probably a little bit of number 4 in there as well. Zach, of course, addressing a number of those different areas. Emma again coming across into those sessions 4 and 5, and then finally Julie coming through into that, okay, what do we mean by that shared value? Now we could carry on doing this mapping all day, couldn't we, Ludovine? But it just shows that there have been those strands that have come through the course of the past week, which have been great. And also what this means is that anybody who wants to use this material, the mapping's all there. So if you need to construct, I don't know, 3 videos that you need your students to watch, for example, to then write an essay on, they're all there. All the material is there to inspire that thought, and also get, listen to people who disagreed with one another as well, because there have been lots and lots of different points of view over the past week. So moving from that into the next area. So what do we do with this shared knowledge? And Ludovine, do you want to come in on this?
I do, because I think one of the elements that's really important here, and this was mentioned in one of the panel sessions previously, is that there is a community forming around these discussions and these ideas. And it's critically important that this community also not only projects everything that we've heard, but if we are to act, in line with all of these ideas and options, I think it's important to build a mandate that is legitimate. And that's my governance hat right there on. So what we have here is really our proposals for first outcomes, really in the sphere of knowledge. The first one is that the conference itself has generated the talks, the recordings, the abstracts. There is already a colossal pool of information there. But okay, the next step is, how do we move that to, synthetic, presentation of something that really moves the dial, that moves the debate forward. And that's where we thought, well, the conference report, which will be our inaugural conference report, should really hinge on this notion of changing the business model. It's come across in every session that what we're changing here is not just how we do mining, how we organize this or that process. No, it's actually the entire structure of how we position this business and how it interacts with the world. So we're going to be pulling from all the talks and all the panel discussions, the elements that have come to the fore about this business model, how to rethink it, what are the proposals that we've heard, how do they perhaps work together, or where do they actually contradict each other? Because hopefully that's the basis for the next set of discussions. And in terms of really a second outcome, perhaps more in the medium term, is an analysis bit focusing on ESG ratings. We had ESG ratings were raised throughout the conference, not just because Elon Musk was dumping on them on Twitter, but because they are almost a confusion in this important debate. What are ESG ratings looking at? Why do we use them? Why do we feel they fail us? And more importantly, are we really using them in the way they're supposed to be used? And if we're not, okay, what do we want to use instead? So all of these questions, rather than saying ESG ratings don't work, okay, so let's think about how they can work, how they should work, and how they will work. And that is perhaps where we see a valuable bit of analysis that can come from these discussions and the connections we've made, again, to shape the future of the discussion.
Great, thanks for that, Ludovine. So with that, of course, we've got the conference. We've also got these 4 areas as well, which are already being churned out as tangible actions into then the conference report, so the changing business model, and we'll share some information on that right now. And then the final aspect that we've got on the desk at the moment is around really challenging those ESG ratings. We've already had engagement with some of the world's largest investors, okay, so the users of those ESG ratings. We're increasingly managing to get hold of the ESG ratings organizations themselves, and then of course we've got interaction with the mining companies as well. So how do we bring all of that together to do exactly as what Ludovine said? So those are some of our ideas we've got at the moment. We don't need to own this. We just need to kickstart this discussion and chuck the pebble into the pond. So this is not by no means an ego trip or anything like that. This is us just trying to kickstart the discussions and say that's a massive lever that needs to be pulled that can actually change something. So the final imagery that we will leave you with before we open for discussion and everyone can then go and get on with their weekends, which I'm sure you'll be glad to do, is this concept of mining as the keystone, which I sure we said earlier on, thought, okay, well, what does that actually mean? Well, this came out in some of those talks that we had on Wednesday, so very much midweek. in conjunction with the circular economy. So, and this diagram has been put together this morning during the presentation. Okay, so it's a little bit scrappy and there are probably some spelling mistakes, but let's just go with it and let's just test it. So if you've got this funnel of information that is coming into the circular economy, yes, we still need to be able to mine those raw materials. Despite various reports that have been published on the BBC, etc., earlier on this week, we do not have enough material in circulation at the moment for us to be able to generate the infrastructure and the technology that we need in order to be able to actually just survive as normal, let alone go through the just transition. The only way we'll be able to survive with just the material that we have in circulation right now is, and I'm going to point at that elephant in the room, a serious reduction in global population. Now, obviously, we don't want that. So therefore, we need to be able to add more material into this circle in a responsible manner. So that then comes into this world of mining and processing, because really, when we say mining, we're not just talking about digging material out the ground. That would be pointless because nobody needs that raw material. Well, in some cases we do, but in the majority of situations, you have to be able to process it. So when I say mining, I am meaning mining and the processing. Okay, I'm just being lazy and not talking about the processing side. So if you've got this mining and processing chunk in this circular economy, that is the material that goes into manufacturing. And then I've said advanced manufacturing, because of course, as we know, depending on what if you're building a car, there are lots and lots and lots of different steps that needs to go through that probably involves the material doing a couple of laps around the world as well. So we need to be thinking about those supply chains. So you've got your manufacturing, you've got your advanced manufacturing. Somebody then uses whatever it might be, that phone or that pen or whatever it is that you're making. Then hopefully somebody mends it. Okay, so this is the bit where we say, okay, actually, I don't have a washing machine, to be honest, in my little off-grid hut, because that would use way too much energy. But say, for example, I have a washing machine and one bit of it decides to disintegrate or just wears out. How do I replace that component part to make sure that that washing machine lasts 20 years instead of the 10 that is currently on the warranty or whatever it is for that washing machine? So how do I mend it? But then, of course, we get to the point where we do need to say, well, you know what, as the user, this is now waste to me. It has no value to me, but it might have a value to somebody else. So that then goes into the waste sorting. And that then comes back into this processing bit. So this is the recycling bit of that loop. Now, have we missed things in this interpretation of the circular economy? Of course we have. We've missed lots. And in fact, the main bits that we've missed, so this is drawn from the perspective of mining. And the reason why so many mining people draw the circular economy like this is because often it's just drawn as a circle. And everyone says, well, where's the input? Where's the input to it? So we're going to stick a big input arrow in here. Well, the real circular economy is actually all about collaboration, because it's not just mining that adds in raw material or raw ideas to all of this. When it comes to things like manufacturing, etc., exactly as Emma was saying, how do we design the products that we need at the end of the day? What about how do we decide which materials we actually need? Are we thinking about things like those supply chains? And then into the use, what about our own behaviors as individuals? We're all being told at the moment, in order for us to be able to achieve a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030, if we switched off every coal-fired power station, the burning of every single bit of oil and gas, we wouldn't do it. We need to change the way we eat. We need to change the way that we behave. We need to change the way that we travel, for example. So how do we change how we use these materials? So the individual behavior. In terms of mending, yep. So how long do we actually use these bits of infrastructure, these bits of kit for, and then into the recycling. So how do we actually go about sorting out all of those materials? And where we do have to put something into landfill, is it really landfill or is it long-term storage? By saying, okay, we can't at the moment recycle those plastic films that you get on some food packaging, but that doesn't mean to say we won't have invented the technology to be able to recycle it in 10 years. So let's remember where we put it. As someone who started out life as an exploration geologist, it's all about saying, okay, the Earth, which was formed 4.56 billion years ago, and then went through huge sorting processes, because that's what we've got with the concentration of those minerals and metals. And so an exploration geologist, what we do is we work out where stuff is in the ground. At the moment, we're creating landfill, and we don't necessarily, depending on where we are in the world and the regulations, etc., we don't necessarily know where the stuff is that we're putting in there, because we might want to go back and mine it in the future. So again, this is very much a conceptual model, but do we talk about it like this? And do we talk about it in terms of collaboration and respect for one another as well? Because we're bringing different things to the party. So with that, I'll hand back to Ludovine for final words, and then we'll open up to our final discussion, and that will be it.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I think really the final word is we should continue as we started. The reason the slide is up here again, although you all know all of our connection details, is because the strength and the value of what we're trying to shape here lies in every single one of you sending us those messages, talking in the conferences, the amazing comments that we get in the chats. By the way, thank you, Aldo, for your feedback, because we're going to consider it particularly in shaping the next events. All of this is actually what makes responsible raw materials perhaps a little special, but also very powerful. And so my final word would be in touch, let us know. The whole point here is to say these things that perhaps don't sound so great on the usual stages, or don't even get to the usual stages, because they need to be said. So that's more my call to action to everybody out there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ludovine. And as well, you don't need to come to us. We will come to you. So to all of you who've been saying, hey, can you come and speak at our event that's happening in 2 weeks' time or whatever, where absolute possible, the answer is yes, because we need to be able to engage in as many of those discussions as possible. And if we can't do it, we'll find you someone who can. So brilliant. So with that, thank you very much, Ludovine. I'm going to give you a round of applause. And I think we need to give Rose a massive round of applause, by the way. Big, 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 big round of applause to the fantastic Rose Clark, who started off on this journey as an intern 3 years ago. So it was all because of, in fact, it's all Rose's fault. There we go. Let's lay it at your feet, Rose, for all of this happening. Because to be honest, if Rose hadn't come to us and said, hey, I need to do a 2-week internship on something, and then not that COVID has been a good thing at all, but because COVID came in, we had to switch up that idea really, really quickly. And thus the first ever Responsible Raw Materials Conference was born. So brilliant. Thank you very much, Rose, for making all of this happen. There we go, Rose. Brilliant. Cool. So just, I think, in closing with regards to this, we've still got our fantastic speakers from this morning. And I realize that we've just thrown a huge amount of information out there. It's still very much spinning around my head. Julie, perhaps if I can come to yourself first, give me a big thumbs down if you want me to go to somebody else first. Okay, awesome. Julie, perhaps if I can come to yourself first and just get your reflections on all of this. And then Phil, perhaps if I go to you next.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, well done for attempting to put together that summary. Always very challenging. Lots and lots of content to package up. I think the two bits that spoke to me the most about what I saw you share was it piqued my interest, but also made me want to ask a tough question, which is probably a reflection of my personality, around the ambition to keep building on the momentum of this group and these conversations, to be a space that fosters dialogue and exchange that actually makes a difference. And I think where I want to sort of put the tough question back to all of us that I think needs to continue to be our measuring stick in all the work we do is, okay, how is this actually making a difference? You know, we have all been to so many conferences. There are so many venues for talking about what's going on in the sector and how it's responsible and the latest thing. Like, there's no dearth of events, or I'll say it maybe generously, dialogue platforms that I wouldn't really consider true dialogue platforms. And so I would certainly want to challenge everybody in this group, if we're going to be part of that effort, make sure it's actually different in the sense that it's actually getting us somewhere. Because I keep coming back to that rather tough premise that I shared with you in my remarks, which is I've spent 10 years, well, nearly 10 years not focused entirely on minerals and metals. I've just come back and I'm seeing the same practices from 10 years ago that lead to the same sort of subpar outcomes. That's a very, as Zach says, very broad brush. That's not fair to everybody. But I think there's certainly room for improvement. In the one sense, you can say that's a quite negative, critical message. I would like to say, look, there's a huge opportunity then. The other piece, which is sort of smaller, that certainly piqued my interest, was this remark about ESG ratings. I do a lot of work with financial institutions, including those who do ESG ratings, those who develop them, those who are subject to them, those who use them, who are also financial institutions. That's a very, very interesting subject matter. Zach, I saw your comments. I think that there's a lot to be said in terms of where do those ratings come from? What legacy practices do they reflect that we can say at this point do not have evidence to support them, that they actually lead to performance improvements? Again, based on the performance indicator that would set improved outcomes for people and environment as the performance indicator, as compared to the presence of a policy, the presence of an audit, et cetera. But it's certainly something that there has been a very extensive conversation already on many levels with ESG ratings and rankings institutions. It continues to evolve. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. But again, I would just caution companies who feel subject to all of this and going, I'm being pulled in every direction all the time, this is horrible. I would agree that is kind of horrible. And what I think, again, is useful, for me at least, I keep going back to that guiding light set by the UN guiding principles. Because if you're worried that there's going to be, it's whack-a-mole again of like a new ESG rating that I'm going to be subject to, do that standard. Do the UNGPs, which is the same as the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, which is really aligned to the new forthcoming regulation out of the EU. You're going to be okay. But that's the standard you got to go to, not some of the legacy standards that I think we've seen swimming around in the space. So that's my thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Julie. Fantastic. And you see Ludovine applauding you there. Brilliant. Phil, do you want to come in on this discussion, and then we'll go to Emma?
Yeah, thanks. I think, as Julie said, the real sort of take home for me is opportunity. It really feels like there is an opportunity to do things better here and for a bright future. Listening earlier to Johannes talk about Europe and how they'd abandoned mining in the 80s and now are coming back to it, and there's an opportunity to do things better. Well, from my perspective of technology metals, that's fantastic to hear, because they are a neglected commodity that gets very little attention. And this is an opportunity to do things better and to really build them into future mining consideration. Also, just hearing all of the people talking about social involvement and getting communities really involved in it and seeing the benefits for them. I think that's a really positive step and something that it's wonderful that you're drawing attention to it through this conference.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Phil. Brilliant. Emma, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Antoine.
I'm feeling a bit as if I don't have anything unique to say at this point, and really appreciative of everybody else's inputs, because it's been a really eye-opening experience. This is a unique forum for me, and I just am overwhelmed by what you're trying to do in not only changing what people do, but changing the way that they think. And there can be nothing more valuable than that. So I can only just sit here and applaud what everyone's doing, what people are saying, thinking, and trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Emma. That means a lot. So thank you very much. Antoine, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Johannes.
I mean, maybe on the discussion itself, I think that for me, one of the key messages, echoing what the debate that's going on on the ESG, sustainability, shared value. I mean, all this, acronym or conceptual war, which fights is I think trying to see how we can put it back to the from the perspective of people, which was I think what was said, what Julie says. I mean, GNGP is, I mean, it's been done by lawyers, so obviously you can't understand it at the end, but if you want to take it back to it's take the perspective of the people you're affecting, take the perspective of like a community member who is going to be very vulnerable, or the perspective of the worker, and try to to understand in a very meaningful manner what they are going through, etc. And I think that that you can dumb it down, but after like making it work is difficult. And I think to me the challenge is how do we bridge this gap? Is how do you bring these these voices to the ESG, and how do you then also make these indicators meaningful to the people? Because that's a conversation that I think is it's completely disconnected, and I think there's that bridge. I don't see it being built very often. I'm not saying it doesn't exist because I've only my prism, but I think there's a big gap there. Now, as to how this group can be useful, for all it matters, I mean, Zach and I are going to connect next week, and we didn't know each other. So I think it's just a little glimmer of a nice way of connecting, and of course, hopefully we can broaden that, because the more sobering thing is that it's a self-selected audience, and many of the biggest challenges is those that are, I mean, you don't have to be here to be doing good things, of course. There's no moral judgment, but clearly the motivation to do something is really important, and I hope we can go to those that are being silent but interested, or those that are opposed but need to change.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Antoine. Fantastic. And I'm so glad that you and Zach are connecting. That's great. Johannes, let's come to yourself next. Sorry, Zach, let's come to yourself next, and then we'll go to Johannes.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I totally muddled that one up. Johannes.
Yeah, start with Johannes.
Yeah, go with Johannes first, and then we'll go to Zach. We'll do it in alphabetical order.
Well, first, big congrats to Sarah and Rose. I mean, I think it's excellent that you're accumulating all of these talks that people can go back and look at later, because education will always be a part of it. I think my takeaways are that the quality of the permanent two-way engagement between mining and others will define our future. And I think that's a bit of a message I've heard from people today as well. I'm not at all worried about the byproducts or the technology metals. Society will have all the mineral resources it deserves. Then we can have all the questions about, well, how do we want to produce them? How do we want to make sure that we deserve the best? And I completely agree with the sentiment of just get on with it. And I want to support what we've heard today about, we need to get back to speaking the language of concrete outcomes for the people affected. And I think that often enough, this industry might be held to standards that are met by other sectors, but often enough, those standards might really just be checkbox exercises as well. So on the provocative side, I wonder, it may mean that mining companies have to be courageous enough to not respond to some of these other demands and simply come forward in a consistent, permanent way. Here are the real concrete outcomes we are having for our people, and have the courage to let some of those other demands unmet for a while.
Great, thank you very much for that, Johannes. Brilliant. Zach.
I'm so glad Johannes went first, because he said it better than I could. And that was perfect. I think as an industry we face a bunch of big dangers, but I think in this conversation we face two big ones. The one is that ESG ratings and these policies and structures and things and whatnot end up being greenwashing and rainbow washing. And I'm going to do something enormously unfair, and Julie, I'm going to apologize ahead of time, which is the OECD, the UNGP, all of these things have the very best of intentions, but they are incredibly Eurocentric. They're Eurocentric, they're Northern Hemisphere centric, they're Western world centric. And the world is different in different places. And so I think Johannes's point of, find our space, do our best, do what we believe to be the most ethical things that we can do, and then show them in a way that shows all, opens our kimono, shows our whole view of who we are and what we're doing. And then call out companies that aren't doing that, that are obfuscating things, that are hiding things, that are only showing bits. If we do that, then we will move forward in this clumsy negotiation. If we're willing to try and do our best, our thing that we believe to be most ethical, most genuinely good, then slowly the world will move forward. And slowly we will begin to align towards those common goals, towards that common ethical and moral compass.
Great, thank you very much for that, Zach. Now I can't then finish rounding up the conference by totally ignoring that question that you posed to Julie. Julie, do you want to come in on that, and then I'll go to Ludovine?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
In a way, I don't disagree with you, Zach. I think this is an interpretation question, because to me, the power of what the guiding principles articulate is specifically around that issue that I tried to hone in on in my remarks, which is about the stakeholder engagement. I mean, that's like the fancy term for it, but basically you can't demonstrate that you're doing business responsibly if you just kind of go ahead and like implement a bunch of standards that you think are relevant and say that's it. And so, you know, I have looked at hundreds of companies' practices on these things. And if I don't see evidence that what they're doing is shaped around whatever affected people are telling them in terms of what the needs are and how their fundamental welfare and dignity is being impacted by this company's activities, that's not demonstration of responsible business. So that's what I'm looking for. And I think, frankly, this is kind of a misinterpretation point. I had the honor of working with the folks who wrote the guiding principles, and I know that was the guiding light in it. So I think we don't need to get into a discussion about this standard or that standard. The point is, I think we absolutely agree. This is not about coming in and imposing some external standard. This is the point around ensuring that the steps that the company takes to do business responsibly are framed around what are the needs of the people who are affected by the business. And at the end of the day, exactly, I think as Johannes, I kind of liked your little courageous point there at the end, said, look, you're going to get maybe hit with a bunch of different standards. Let's focus on what the actions you have taken to improve outcomes for people and planet. Fini, you know? And I think that's really where we coalesce then here at this point.
Great, thank you very much for that, Julie. Brilliant. So just in closing, Ludovine, any final words to share with everybody, and then I'll go to Rose.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Thank you to all again for adding so much. This may be a pet obsession, but I think it's also a red thread that we've seen throughout our discussions today. Accountability. And I realize that when people hear accountability, they think of it as a punitive concept. Accountability also necessarily means empowerment. You can't hold someone accountable if you haven't given them the space, power, and capacity to do what you're holding them to account for. So I view a lot of these discussions as a call to action, but also a call to accountability. Accountability of ourselves, and I know I said this yesterday also, but also holding others accountable on the basis of what we have discussed or agreed as shared values. And that's where I think I very much meet Julie's point. Guidelines and standards are tools. They're tools to define accountability mechanisms. Let's use them. And if you're using them, say what you do and do what you say. And frankly, if we start with that, you know, we'll be already a long way towards a lot of solutions being developed, or more importantly, implemented for positive outcomes. So yeah, the lawyer view, but still useful.
We'll take it, Ludovine, we'll take it. Brilliant. Rose, any final words?
Thank you. I'm going to start this by zooming all the way back out and saying, firstly, thank you to you, Sarah, because you've made this work and allowed these threads through all the different sessions to work and for them all to come out. I think Graham has said in the chat that this is a really great forum because we jumble everybody up and nobody is an expert in everything. And we've had this conversation throughout the week of, you know, the generalist versus the expert in things. And I think there's room for both, but it can be difficult to get communication between those two different types of people. And I really like the fact that this forum allows that, and a lot of that is due to your hosting. So thank you for that. Yeah, big claps for Sarah, because you are fantastic and keep this going. And I think, yeah, to keep it really short and sweet, let's just do it and move forward. And I think that's a nice sentiment to go into the weekend with.
Brilliant. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you to all of you who have contributed to this past week and also will be contributing going forwards as we take action we make that impact and we change the world. So let's get on and just do it. So brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your week. The lights have gone out for me here in Scotland, which is a trigger to say shut up because the internet's about to go down. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. You've been truly amazing. See you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.